Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's BSI webinar, Supplier Onboarding Done Right. Thank you for taking the time to join us, and we are delighted to have participants from across uh, the inspection, supply chain, and assurance community with us today. In today's session, we'll explore how organizations can establish a robust supplier onboarding process that not only ensures compliance and quality, but also helps build resilient, transparent, and sustainable supply chains. Whether you're looking to strengthen supplier relationships, manage risk more effectively, or improve operational efficiency, we hope today's discussion will provide practical insights and valuable takeaways that you can apply within your own organizations. Once again, welcome to BSI's webinar, Supplier Onboarding Done Right. We look forward to an informative and engaging session with you today. So before we start, just a few quick housekeeping reminders. All participants are currently on mute to ensure the best audio experience for everyone. Please note that today's session is being recorded and we will share both the recording and presentation materials after the webinar. We also encourage you to submit any questions throughout the session using the Q&A chat box. We'll address as many questions as possible during the discussion or at the end. Thank you, and let's get started. It is my honor to present to you our speaker for today, Ms. Dana Grace Birotilla, MBA RCH. She is currently the client manager for sustainability here at BSI. She is a registered chemist with over 13 years of experience in the certification and training industry. Ms. Dana is highly skilled in sustainability reporting requirements, including GRI, SASB, and TNFD standards. Her expertise extends to various management systems, including quality and laboratory management, anti-bribery, and environmental management. Her diverse background encompasses roles in business development, consultancy, and compliance across leading organizations, equipping her with a comprehensive understanding of sustainability impacts. Ladies and gentlemen, our speaker, Ms. Dana Grace B. Retilia.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, no? And welcome to our BSI webinar, Supplier Onboarding Done Right. So, thank you for spending the next 30 minutes or so with us. But before we begin, no, I have one assignment agad, no. I'd like you to think of one supplier your organization really depends on. You don't need to put their names on the chat, ha. Just keep that supplier in mind. Okay. It could be a manufacturer, an ingredient supplier, a logistics provider, maybe an IT provider, or a contractor, or someone handling important information for you. Okay. So you already have it in mind. Okay, so keep that supplier in mind throughout our conversation because we're going to use them as our personal case study. Okay, so today we're going to answer one central question. How do we know whether a supplier is actually capable of protecting our brand? We'll look at why supplier assurance matters, the 8 areas we should examine, a practical risk-based framework. We will look at some scenarios as well. And finally, where independent assurance can help. And because this is Zoom, please use the chat box and also the question and answer. So I don't want this to feel like 30 minutes of me simply talking to you. Okay. So let's start with the bigger picture. No? Supplier onboarding used to be viewed largely as a procurement activity. Today, it's becoming a strategic risk management issue. Why? Because supply chains now have changed. No? Supply chains now are longer, they're faster, and much more interconnected. And that means a problem that starts with a supplier can reach your own customers remarkably quickly. A weak supplier can delay a launch, they can trigger a recall, they can create a regulatory issue, or damage a brand that took decades to build. And here's the uncomfortable reality: your customer doesn't really care whose fault it was. If your supplier fails, but your logo is in the product, the customer experiences it as your failure. So can we will have a poll, no? I hope everyone can participate. So let's just see where everyone is today. How does your organization typically vet a new supplier? Is it A, mostly price and lead time, B, questionnaire and documents, C, a formal risk-based audit, and D, no consistent process yet? Hmm. Okay, that's interesting, no? Please keep your answer in mind, no? And by the end of this session, I want you to ask yourself whether your current process really gives you enough evidence to make a confident supplier decision. Okay, so the problem with choosing the wrong supplier is that the real cost usually doesn't appear during onboarding. It appears after the contract is signed, no? And sometimes much later. Okay. So let's look at what's on the screen. I'll just use my laser pointer. Product recalls, counterfeit goods, delivery disruption, ESG failures, cybersecurity risk, reputational damage, and lost customer trust. Different problems, but there's one common thread. They begin upstream, but eventually they land on your brand. So I would want to ask, you can put one word in the chat box. Which supplier risk worries your organization most? Is it quality? Is it delivery? Is it compliance? Is it ESG, cybersecurity, or maybe continuity? Quality. Someone said quality. Hmm. ESG failures. Wow. Else. Okay. So a lot of you has said quality, and then some is more on customer trust, no? Compliance as well. Okay. So we're actually getting different answers, and that is important because different suppliers really create different risks, no? So for those raising their hands, you may write your question and answer in the chat box, so we will answer din naman later on. Okay. Your questions on the chat box pala. Okay. There you go. Chat box is disabled, so you can use Q&A na lang pala. Okay. So yan. So if you look at the screen now, these risks aren't theoretical. The risks that I've talked about a while ago aren't theoretical actually. The examples on screen show a range of issues we can encounter. So it can be an ingredient quality problem. It can be counterfeit goods. It can be food safety and recall concerns and forced labor risks, no? Deeper in supply chains. And the specific issue changes. But the lesson in all of these failures does it. What happens upstream can become a commercial, regulatory, and reputational problem downstream. So the key message here is very simple. Supplier risk may start upstream, but the consequences eventually reach your customer and your brand. So a good onboarding is therefore not just a procurement activity, it's risk management. So now the question is our traditional way of qualifying suppliers enough? No? This actually brings us to an important distinction. A checklist can tell us that a supplier exists and has submitted documents, but it doesn't automatically tell us whether the supplier can protect our brand. So, your own traditional or the traditional qualification might ask, do they have permits? Do they have references? Did the sample they submitted pass? Can they offer a competitive price? No? Supplier assurance now asks a much harder question. Can this supplier protect our brand under pressure? And that's the shift I want you to remember. So from self-reported information, you now have verified evidence. From one-time approval, you now have ongoing monitoring. And from price-led decisions, you can now make risk-informed decisions. So there are actually three principles here. Risk-based, which is the effort follows the exposure. Evidence-based are decisions are based on verified information and not just simply declarations. And life cycle based. So once they get approved, it doesn't mean that the risk disappears. So if you remember nothing else from this section, I just want you to remember this. Risk tells us where to look. Evidence tells us what to believe. Monitoring tells us whether it's still true. Supplier qualification usually asks, can we approve them? Supplier assurance now goes further and asks, can they consistently protect us? So that shift requires a risk based, evidence based, and life cycle approach. So if we want evidence rather than assumptions, no, the question now is, what exactly should we be looking at? So now let's get practical naman. Now, if we're going to look beyond a supplier questionnaire, what should we actually examine? And I will show you a framework that gives us 8 dimensions. So here they are: legal compliance, quality management, operational capability, supply chain resilience, product quality controls, ESG and responsible sourcing, information security, and financial stability. So there are actually 8 slides after this, but instead of reading them to you, I will make this more interesting. No? So for the next few minutes, we're actually going to play spot the red flag. So please, I'll give you scenarios, and you can chat in the chat box your comments or your answer, yan, or in the Q&A pala. Okay. So now let's talk about legal compliance. So for the first scenario, no, your supplier says our permit is currently under renewal. Don't worry, we've been operating for years. Would you approve them? Yes or no? So, or you can give me a reaction, may reaction ba dito? So, if you're comfortable, you can say yes. If not, you you can say no if you want more evidence. Oh, some says no. No, some said approve lang pag may permit na, no? The others naman, bigyan mo pa ako ng more evidence, na? Okay. So, but most of you said no, no? So that's legal compliance. Okay. Here in legal compliance, the question isn't whether the supplier sounds confident. It's whether we have evidence that registrations, licenses, permits, and regulatory obligations are actually being met. Let me just say this: confidence is not evidence. Okay. Okay. Thank you. So next scenario or next supplier, you ask, how are non-conformities handled? They say, si QM po, si quality manager po ang gumagawa, or our quality manager takes care of everything. So you ask again, can I see your corrective action records? Sinagot ka, naka-leave po siya today eh. Nangyayari to. Alam naman natin yon, no? So now, if quality disappears when one person goes on leave, we don't really have a quality system. We have a quality person. What we're looking for here is evidence that quality is really built into the organization's processes, not dependent on one heroic employee. So, on the third one, we'll talk about this scenario. Your supplier says, yes, we can produce 100,000 units per month. Kaya po yan, ma'am. Fantastic, no? But then you ask, what's the most you've actually produced? 20,000 po. So now I'm interested because there's actually a huge difference between we can and here's evidence that we can. Operational capability is about whether the supplier can actually deliver the required volume consistently and on time. So for supply chain resilience naman, no? So, wow, I have a supplier. They are excellent. They really deliver on time. Quality of the product is really good. But there is one critical matter that you found out. One critical material comes from one sub supplier in one location. And then a typhoon hits, production stops, and suddenly someone asks, wait, sino na magsusupply sa supplier natin? Okay. So now that's supply chain resilience. And here's a question in this factor no, that you would want to think about. How far down your own supply chain can you really actually see? Okay. So another scenario, no, a product problem occurs. You ask the supplier, which batches are affected? Di ka nila masagot. They can't tell you. So now, is that a red flag? Absolutely. No, product controls aren't simply about final inspection. We want traceability, specifications, testing, and controls that will allow us to identify and contain problems quickly. Because poor traceability can actually turn a small recall into a very large one. So now, imagine your supplier now looks good. They give great samples, they give great products. They can deliver on time, their documentation is great, no? But then you discover production has been subcontracted to another facility that nobody disclosed. So now your risk picture changes. Who is actually making the product? Under what working conditions? Using what environmental practices? This is very common that we only see tier one of our suppliers. The problem is now you may not be seeing your real ESG exposure anymore. So information security naman tayo. So this is one supplier risk that can easily be overlooked. So imagine you have four supplier employees, no, four employees for one supplier that actually shares one login access to your organization's information. Will you be comfortable? Probably not. Because a supplier cybersecurity weakness can very quickly become your own cybersecurity incident. So if suppliers that handle your data or access your systems or no or yeah, so here information security belongs in supplier assurance. And last but not the least, no, financial stability. Imagine your critical supplier suddenly starts paying their own suppliers late. Maybe nothing is wrong, affected ba kami? But it's certainly something we'd want to understand because we're not only asking, can this supplier deliver today? We're also asking, will this supplier be still capable of supporting us throughout the contract. Okay. So the big takeaway from these 8 criteria is that when you look at supplier risk, it is multidimensional. A supplier can actually be excellent in quality, but weak in resilience, or maybe in compliance, or maybe in ESG, cybersecurity, or financial stability. So, one certificate or one good product sample never really tells us the whole story. So now that we know what to look at, no? So let's turn these 8 factors or 8 areas into an actual decision making process. The next question now that we would want to ask ourselves is, how do we turn these 8 criteria into a repeatable process? So look at the life cycle in your screens right now, no? So you identify, you pre-qualify, you risk assess, you audit, you implement corrective actions, you approve the supplier, you monitor, and you improve. You may have noticed approval is number 6, not number 8. And that is actually deliberate because approval is not the finish line. Okay? Usually, once a supplier is approved in your organization, when are they reassessed? You may state your answer, no, in the Q&A box. Pag na-approve na si supplier, usually when are they reassessed? 6 months ba? Every 6 months? Annually? Or depende sa risk or performance? Or not really sure? Annually or prior to renewal. Some says semi-annual. Some says annual. A lot of you says annual and biannual. Ah, wow. One has monthly supplier evaluation. Wow. Depends on the need. Maybe depends on the on the not material or the service or the product they provide. Depends on the risk category. Okay? Some says criticality. Okay. So really here no yung assessment or reassessment, this is often where supplier programs really become vulnerable. We put enormous effort into getting suppliers onto the approved list and sometimes very little into determining whether they should stay there. Okay? Okay. And importantly, this does not mean auditing every supplier at maximum depth. That will be very expensive and inefficient. So if it's low risk, maybe document review and monitoring is enough. Medium risk, maybe we need to do pre-qualification and then we'll have targeted audits. High risk, now we may need a deeper on-site assessment and also a corrective action plan before approval. So the principle here is you don't audit everyone equally. You audit according to your risk exposure. Okay. So this is probably one of the most practical tools in today's session. So this is what we call a weighted supplier scorecard. Because without a defined criteria, another very sophisticated supplier selection method can actually creep in about it, like parang I have a good feeling about them, no? Or maybe they've been supplying us for years. Or, hindi, sila yung pinakamababa. So, sila na kunin natin. No? So instead, you would want to determine what matters. So depends again on your industry. Your legal compliance might carry 15%, quality management might carry 20%, operational capability 15%, and so on and so forth. And then you score them against evidence. In the example on the screen, as you can see here, the total here is 3.87 and their approval threshold is at 3.5. So, looking at this, we now have a decision that is more consistent, measurable, as well as defensible. And we also have a baseline for future reassessments as well. Because this is also a requirement for those of you who are certified to ISO 9001. So, the goal again isn't to actually audit every supplier equally. No? It is to apply the right level of scrutiny to the right risk. Okay? So a structured life cycle and scorecard can help turn your supplier approval form from gut feel into a consistent evidence-based decision. And now, what does that look like in practice? So let's put this framework into test. I'm going to give you three supplier situations, and as we go through them, decide would I approve, conditionally approve, or stop. Okay, you can chat in the chat box. Okay, here's supplier A. Fantastic local support. No? It's a your supermarket wants to scale it nationwide. So it's very exciting. So the product is good, it's great, but the pre-launch audit finds they have no certified food safety management system. They only have a single production line. They have no continuity plan. They have incomplete batch traceability. So here's my question. Does a great product sample prove that the supplier can reliably produce thousands of great products? No. No. So basically the lesson here is powerful, no? A great sample is not a reliable system. So you would want to audit the process, not just the product. So another case, another supplier. They're a low-cost overseas garment manufacturer. They were sourced through your agent. So everything initially appears fine until the audit reveals undisclosed subcontracting to another site with labor concerns. And this gives us perhaps the most important supplier question of all. Who actually performs the work? It's not the one who sends the invoice. It's not the one who signed the contract. No. So who actually manufactured the product? So if we only see tier one, we cannot necessarily see our real risk. No? Next supplier, imported electronics. No? And they have something procurement teams love. I know you all love this. A very attractive price. So the thing is, whenever I hear low price or attractive price, no, my auditing brain or auditor brain becomes curious. Um, the review identifies missing safety marks and possible intellectual property infringement. So the shipment is halted before the products reach customers. This one now illustrates the difference between risk management and crisis management. If we acted before shipment, we're managing risk. If we acted after our products have reached the customers, we're already managing consequences. So these three cases really shows us that supplier risk can hide behind a great product or maybe a trusted agent or maybe an attractive price. The value now of assurance or audit is finding that risk before it becomes a recall, a disruption, a compliance issue, or maybe a reputational problem. Okay, so where can now independent audits or assurance or assessment strengthen that process? Yeah. So it's not necessarily by creating more audits, but by actually providing additional capacity, expertise, reach, and independence where the risk warrants it. Okay? So the keyword here, how we can help, no? The keyword here is life cycle. We can help your organizations find the risk through supplier risk assessment, vendor qualification, and second party audits. Verify on the ground through factory assessments and process audits. Source responsibly through responsible sourcing and ESG assessments. And most importantly, we can close the loop through corrective action verification and ongoing assurance. Because raising a finding isn't the objective here, reducing the risk is. So, and you'll notice that these capabilities, they connect directly back to the 8 areas we have discussed a while ago. So your factory and second party audits can examine the quality, capability, and legal compliance. Process audits can look at product controls. Responsible sourcing assessments address labor, ethical, and environmental exposure. Your information security reviews can address suppliers handling your systems and data. And your corrective action verification can confirm whether the identified problems were actually addressed. So these are not about isolated services, it's about closing the gaps. So, yan. So, why organizations choose BSI? Because we bring global standards, expertise together with local, no, Philippine support and independent audits and assurance. But for me, one of the most important principle on the slide is risk-based approach. Because the goal should not be to make your supplier assurance, supplier onboarding more complicated. The goal is really to make it more focused. Put your resources where exposure is highest. No? So the objective really isn't simply to conduct more audits, it's to build the right assurance around the risks that matter, from initial qualification and on site verification through corrective action, monitoring, and improvement. And that actually brings us back to the most important question. What would you now do differently after today's webinar? Uh, So please remember that great brands are protected long before products reach the shelf. Protection starts when we decide who gets in our supply chain, what evidence do we require, and how do we continue monitoring them. So before I end my time, no, I want you to take 3 questions back to your next procurement or maybe leadership meeting. So one, when does our process stop? Does it stop at approved or do we monitor and re-audit? Two, can we see our sub-tiers? Do we know who our suppliers depend on? Three, is our effort actually risk-based? Are we deeply assessing suppliers that carry the greatest risk, or are we giving everyone essentially the same checklist? No? Don't need to answer all of that, but right now, but if any of those questions made you slightly uncomfortable, that's probably the question worth taking back to your team. Okay? So remember the supplier I asked you to think about at the very beginning? Alala nyo ba siya? Yung nasa utak nyo ngayon. So bring them back to mind ngayon. So at the start, you gave yourself a score from 1 to 5 based on how confident you were that you really understood that supplier. Would you give yourself the same score now? And now here's my challenge. Don't leave this webinar and really try to redesign your entire supplier management system tomorrow, no? You can start with one supplier, take the 8 criteria we have talked about, score them, look at your evidence, and identify where you are relying on assumption instead of assurance. Then ask one final question. If we were onboarding this supplier today, would we still make the same decision? Because ultimately, supplier onboarding isn't about having the longest checklist. It's about having enough credible evidence to confidently say, we trust this supplier with our customers, our operations, and our brand. Okay. And perhaps that's the thought I'd like to leave with you. Your customers may never know who your suppliers are, but they will absolutely experience the consequences of your supplier decisions. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. If you have questions, you may send them through the Q&A box, and maybe we can work some of those together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miss Dana, for an excellent presentation. Your discussion highlighted uh, the importance of maintaining effective systems, managing risk, and driving continuous improvement within their organizations. Building on those key points, I'd like to share how organizations can put these principles into practice through internal and supplier audits. These audits do more than simply check compliance. They provide valuable insights into process performance, supplier reliability, and opportunities for improvement that ultimately contribute to business success. Let's take a few minutes to explore how our audit services can help your organization achieve these objectives. So, strong governance starts with the visibility and assurance. Our internal and supplier audit services help organizations reduce risk, strengthen compliance, and build confidence across their operations and supply chain. We begin by understanding your business objectives, key risk, and risk appetite. From there, we design a tailored audit approach based on industry best practices and your specific requirements. We then collect and assess data against recognized standards, providing an objective view of performance and compliance. The result is actionable, risk based insights that help you improve processes, meet stakeholder expectations, and drive continuous improvement across multiple sites and geographies. With BSI's globally recognized audit expertise and industry accredited programs, we help turn compliance into a competitive advantage. So, as mentioned by Ms. Dana earlier, that what set BSI apart is that we um have that risk-based approach wherein we turn compliance into a competitive advantage. So later on, we will be flashing my contact details so that if ever you have any questions or any clarifications that you would like to discuss, then I'll be very glad to assist you moving forward. Okay? So at this juncture, I would like to introduce the Managing Director of BSI Philippines, Ms. Ava Tanyahura, to give us her appreciation remarks.
Thank you, everyone, for attending our webinar today. And of course, to Dana for that very insightful and practical sharing. Before we proceed to Q&A, so please make sure that you have typed in all your questions. I would like to leave a few key takeaways from today's session. So first, it has been emphasized that supplier onboarding is no longer about finding the lowest cost provider. I've seen in the survey earlier, right, that it's one of the top key criteria for you guys. But we've seen from the presentation that it's not just about low cost provider or checking documentation. In today's very complex and interconnected supply chains, supplier onboarding is fundamentally about protecting your business, your customers, and your brand. When something happens, it's not really the name of the supplier, right, that comes out in the news. It's actually your brand that comes out in the news. A single supplier failure can lead to operational disruptions, regulatory issues, product recalls, or reputational damage. And then another key takeaway, the second one, would be that an effective supplier assurance requires us to move beyond traditional qualification methods. Dana highlighted the question is no longer simply is the supplier acceptable, but rather can this supplier consistently perform and protect our organization under pressure. It's not easy doing business in the Philippines. We experienced so many natural disasters, and over the past few weeks, we've experienced that together. So that's why we emphasize the risk-based approach supported by evidence, assessments, monitoring, and of course, continuous improvement. This is now a business necessity when in the past it it was a nice to have. The third would be the eight assessment criteria, which is sort of like an assignment for you, right? That Dana suggested for you to look into those eight criteria. Um, and that is a very practical framework for making better supplier decisions. We don't want you to change overnight how you um, onboard your suppliers, but it would be good to know, like using this eight criteria, just a quick overview, whether it's legal compliance, quality management, operational capability, resilience, ESG, information security, financial stability. Each area contributes to a more complete picture of supplier risk and performance. And of course, you can you can put your own weight in these criteria depending on what's material or what's very significant to your organization. So before I hand over to Ivan for the much awaited Q&A portion, I really encourage all of us to reflect on the questions shared during the session. Do you monitor your suppliers beyond approval? Do you have visibility beyond your first year suppliers? Are your assurance efforts aligned with your highest risk suppliers? So these conversations can help strengthen not only your procurement processes, but your organization's long-term resilience as well. So thank you again to all the participants and of course for Dana for sharing her expertise. I hope that today's webinar and have provided practical insights and that the questions and answers portion later will be very energizing and useful to all of you. Thank you. Ivan, back to you for the Q&A session.
Thank you for that wonderful message, Miss Ava. So again, may I request everyone to please type in your questions in the Q&A box for any questions that you may have. Okay, so we have a question here for you, Miss Dana. So I am specifically interested in understanding how we can integrate the health and safety requirements of companies in the supplier onboarding process.
Okay, so health and safety, no, should actually be built into your supplier risk assessment from the beginning. But again, you have to think it will depend on the supplier themselves. So there is a difference between someone who supplies office stationery and someone or a contractor coming onto your site to perform electrical or maybe high risk maintenance work. And we won't we don't want to apply exactly the same controls then, no. So what you might want to do now is, as your health and safety exposure increases, we increase the evidence we require. So this could include competency, licenses, maybe training or risk assessments or method statements. Maybe you can ask for incident history, their PPEs or permit to work requirements. No? So again, where applicable. And then after that, we monitor their actual performance and not just the documents they submit during onboarding. No? So we check, we verify if it's really happening. So you can match the safety control based on the exposure of that supplier on health and safety risks. Okay.
Thank you, Miss Dina. So for our next question, so there's a participant who asked, are there differences to guidelines in supplier onboarding, monitoring, analysis, improvement between the 2015 version of ISO 9001 and the upcoming 2026 version?
Ah, for this, I would be careful about redesigning your supplier process around the 2026 requirements yet because they aren't yet final. No, so coming from ISO 9001 2015, the fundamentals are already there. You evaluate and select your external providers, you determine your appropriate controls, you monitor their performance, and then you reevaluate them. Okay. So what we can do now is we can strengthen what a good supplier assurance already requires, no, so you can make it risk based, you can make it evidence based, and you can make it life cycle based. And then when the final standard is published, you now perform a gap assessment and adjust where necessary. um I wouldn't wait for the new edition before I can improve supplier controls. Because right now I can already see, no, some risks that might come out or some things that I would want to improve. So we can do that now. And then we just check, no, the gaps between the next requirements of ISO 9001. Okay.
Thank you, Miss Dina. So another question from one of our participants. What is the actual service you provide? Are you the one performing risk assessment, or will you evaluate our current supplier management process where risk assessment is a part of?
I no, no, actually, right now what we're talking about is our focus for today's session is really more on um internal audits as well as supplier audits, and other applicable second party audits as well, no. So it will really depend on what you require as the buyer. Do you need to be do you need to be do you want them audited against a known standard without necessarily having a certification? We can talk about that. Do you have your own standard that you would want to check if your supplier can are actually complying with? We can also do that for you. No, we can also talk about the signing. No, what you actually need to look at or to look into. So again, it will really depend on your requirement. And then of course, we do the usual management system certification and verification and assurance, no? Report assurance. So that's for your own organization naman. So we can audit your suppliers, we can audit you yourself. Again, depending on your requirement.
Okay, thank you, Miss Dana. I think this will be our last question for today. So, how to augment, or what is the best workaround if a big company supplier did not cooperate or refused on signing a purchasing and quality contract or agreement even after escalations because the supplier insists on applying their own terms?
Ayaw pumirma. Right? Tama ba?
Y-
Intindi ko.
yes,
Yung sa
yes,
supplier.
yes.
Si
And
supplier.
yes, they're insisting on applying their own terms instead of the buyer.
Yeah. Okay, actually, this is a very real situation, no? Particularly for large manufacturers because they are the ones that have the negotiating power. Um, kasi they're your only qualified source, tama, no? So if really they won't accept your terms, don't automatically lower your requirements. You might first want to ask whether their own standards and controls can provide the equivalent assurance that you need. And then identify what's missing, and then you introduce compensating controls, maybe a stronger incoming verification or traceability or monitoring planning or contingency planning or safety stock planning. And once you have determined those controls and significant risk remains, you would want to make that visible to your management and then formally decide whether the residual risk is acceptable. No? Be- yeah, because being sole source actually increases our dependency on them. No? So, really, my takeaway here is if you can change the supplier, strengthen the controls around that supplier. Okay. Or perhaps less leverage should mean more risk management, not lower standards. Okay.
Right. Thank you, Miss Dana. I think this is the last question because I find this very interesting. So, how do we audit suppliers who are not ISO certified? Do these criteria apply even for suppliers who are not ISO certified?
Yes, absolutely. Because the audit criteria, the eight audit criteria we have talked about, can apply whether or not your supplier is ISO certified. ISO certification can be useful evidence that the supplier has certain management system controls, but it shouldn't automatically be the ticket to approval. Or maybe it should not also be a reason to reject a supplier, no, that isn't certified. So if they are non-certified, you just simply look more directly at the evidence. You do your direct audit. Do they have effective quality controls? Are they legally compliant? Can they demonstrate traceability, operational capability, or maybe resilience or responsible sourcing, and maybe information security, and so on and so forth? No. So in fact, no, an ISO 9001 certificate is one possible piece of quality evidence. And you may want to also ask alongside the audit reports, their CAPA logs, and maybe their process and inspection records, not just to really understand or know if they will be able to provide the quality level you require. No? So, yun naman siya. Certification really isn't the evidence of a system. It's just evidence of a system and not really a substitute for you assuring or ensuring that this supplier is fit for you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. So for all the participants, I would like to thank you for your active engagement. But as much as we would like to answer all of your questions, you may still send your questions to us even after this webinar. So I will be flashing later my contact details so you would be able to send your questions, your concerns, or any requests for discussion regarding our services and also about this webinar. Okay, so may I request everyone to please take a few seconds to provide us your feedback via the feedback poll flashed in your screens. So this will be our basis for, um, areas for improvement for other webinars that we will be having. So please take time to answer the feedback poll again. So I hope everyone had a great time and had a specific knowledge regarding the importance of supplier onboarding. And hopefully, what you have learned earlier will be applied to your organizations so that you will be resilient enough in the future. Okay. So flashed on your screens is my contact details. You may scan the QR so you can save my number and email address. So for any concerns regarding the webinar or further questions, please reach me out through this email address, and also you can call me. You can give me a call I think we're done with the feedback wall. Again, once again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for attending the webinar regarding supplier onboarding. And we hope to see all of you in our webinars to come. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.